This is something that the Trump administration is using with a vengeance. They're saying there's one president and he's in charge of the entire executive branch of government, and that he can therefore fire the head of any agency. In fact, he can even fire civil service workers. Any limit on firing of agency heads or civil service workers is inconsistent with the Unitary Executive Theory.
Courts, of course, can weigh expertise as well. And the argument is that conservatives have had historically is that often the people that are the experts in the governmental agencies have a particular political orientation, and that's carried out. So their argument is that the courts would have an opportunity in a more balanced way to hear expert testimony and to make the determination on it. You have mixed feelings on that, or do you feel Chevron was rightly decided before this most recent June decision?
Since the New Deal in the 1930s, the assumption of law has been that Congress needs to give discretion to agencies. The agencies will use their expertise, and courts should defer to that expertise. The Supreme Court no longer buys those assumptions. And so it's limited the ability of Congress to give power to agencies. It no longer wants to defer to the expertise of agencies. And I tend to believe that there are really technical areas where the agencies are the experts. I want to tie this later to something you mentioned earlier, which is called the Unitary Executive Theory. This is something that the Trump administration is using with a vengeance. They're saying there's one president and he's in charge of the entire executive branch of government, and that he can therefore fire the head of any agency. In fact, he can even fire civil service workers. Any limit on firing of agency heads or civil service workers is inconsistent with the Unitary Executive Theory. To this point, the Supreme Court has never accepted the Unitary Executive Theory. In 1935, the Supreme Court said Congress could limit the removal of heads of federal independent regulatory agencies. But this might be a place where the Supreme Court will reverse itself and Trump will win. The question will be, how far will the court go? Will it say just that Trump can fire heads of agencies, or that Trump can fire even civil service workers, and that civil service is unconstitutional? It's a very frightening prospect. And I think what's wrong with it is the Constitution creates checks and balances. The Constitution is not about independent powers, but interdependent powers. And the Trump administration claim of unilateral authority in this regard is a very frightening one to me.
If the High Court said civil service protections are unconstitutional, the chief executive has a right to fire any employee within any of these government entities, would the employees who are then subject to that and lose their jobs, would they have a right, a standing to sue because they were guaranteed the civil service protections as a condition of their employment, right? So if that deal changes, wouldn't there be potential damages that those people could collect?
The answer is no for many reasons. Some of it is that the United States government has sovereign immunity and can be sued for damages only when it consents. And some of it is the Supreme Court would go so far as to say that the civil service law is unconstitutional, then the protections that they were relying on were also unconstitutional. But let's pause for just a moment and think about how radical it is. Civil service has existed since the 19th century. It's always been thought essential in order to have an expert workforce to attract qualified individuals. No president in history until now has tried to say that the Civil Service Act is unconstitutional, that he as president has the right to fire anyone who works in the federal workforce.